Hello, folks. Welcome to Scratch the Surface. My name's EJ Scott. Thanks for joining me. I'm a little under the weather, so I apologize if I'm a little congested or if I start coughing out of nowhere. This podcast is with Francis Manapul. He lives in Toronto, Canada. He's a fantastic artist and writer for comic books, and I was lucky to get an interview with him. I'll go into how that all started in a minute, but right now I want to do a quick plug for the podcast. On Twitter, follow EJ Podcast on Twitter. Follow me at EJ Scott on Twitter. And I have a website, ejscott.com, and I'm raising money for charity, all sorts of different charities. So go to go to crowdrise.com/7on7. That's the number 7 on the number 7. And check out the list of charities I'm raising for, and give what you can. It's you'll be glad you did. This past year, I ran 7 marathons in 7 continents, raising money for charity, as well as seeing the world before possibly I can't someday, because I'm losing my eyesight to an eye disease called choroideremia. And it runs in my family. It's a degenerative hereditary eye disease. So I'm legally blind now, and my goal was to raise a bunch of money and run some full marathons all over the world. Due to sickness and illness, and injury, I was only able to do 2 full marathons, and the rest I did half marathons. So my last marathon was in Toronto, Canada, and I was Facebook friends with Francis Manapul, and just a couple days before I went to Toronto, I clicked on his name out of nowhere, and I saw that he lives in Toronto, and I just took a shot, and I wrote to him and said, "Would you have any interest or time to be on my podcast?" And he said, "Sure." So I was like, "Oh, great, that's awesome." And I go off to Toronto a couple days early, and then I start seeing posts of his on Facebook and Instagram that a friend of his died. And I wrote to him, I said, "God, I'm so sorry about your friend." And then shortly after that, he put up another post saying that his father passed away. So I wrote to him. I said, "I'm so sorry about your dad. Obviously, now may not be a good time to do the podcast, and I totally understand. And I wish you all the best, and condolences to your family." He wrote me back and said, "No, let's do it." So I got really nervous about it, actually, and but he was so great. Like, the second he walked into the hotel room, he was kind enough to sign some comics I had there. He even did some doodles in a couple of Batman and Flash collections, and I'm going to be selling those for my auctions for charity, so keep an eye out for that. But we talk about, he's writing now for Trinity, which is the new Trinity ReBirth for DC, which has, if you're not familiar, it has Wonder Woman, Superman, and Batman in it. And I had read that first story, and it was great. And he does all of it. He writes it, he draws it, inks it, colors it, everything. It's crazy. So we brought up the topic of his father did come up, and it's hard not to when the storyline that he's writing in Trinity right now involves a father and son, namely Clark Kent and his father. So it got really intense. We talked comics, of course, but a lot of it had to do with family and family dynamic and family responsibility and guilt and relationships, and it got really intense. And but I think when you listen to it, I think most people will be able to relate to a lot of it. Francis hadn't seen his father except for once in 30 years. I don't want to give too much away. I'd rather him explain it in his own words. But his parents separated when he was young, and his mom moved to Canada, and his dad stayed in the Philippines. And so there you go. So I hope you will, it's a long interview, but it's really worth it. It's a great talk, and I'm really, really grateful that Francis talked to me about everything that was going on. And again, I'm very sorry about your losses, Francis. And anyway, this is my talk with Francis Manapul.
So what have you been filling your time with since then?
Well, I went to Second City.
Yeah.
That was fun. Not much, really. I went to the movies a couple times.
Oh, yeah. It's a pretty good location, like Young Street's right over there.
Yeah.
Like I think the Mervish Theater's over there. So you're in a pretty
There's a lot going
good
on.
spot.
And it's a. How long have you lived here? Your whole life?
Jeez, I've lived here since I was like 9 years old.
Okay,
so
from.
I don't subtract that from 37.
No, I mean from like where'd you move here?
Oh, I moved here from the Philippines. I was born there, and then I moved here when I was a kid with my mom, my brother, and my sister.
Your mom, your brother, and sister.
Yeah.
Well, any reason why to move?
Well, most of my mom's family is on this side. You know, like her dad, her mom, most of her brothers and sisters.
But she's originally from the Philippines.
Yeah.
So they all moved.
Yeah, so everyone on my mom's side is here. Most of the people on my dad's side are in either the Philippines or in the U.S., you know.
Okay.
But when my mom and my dad separated, I guess you want to be like close to family and stuff like that, right? So my mom went over here, but, I think it's more, I guess, better opportunities. Although, what's kind of funny about that, it was better opportunities for me, my brother, and sister, less so for my mom, because when she was there, she worked for a very good interior design firm. And then when we moved to Canada, none of her schooling qualifications counted.
Right.
So that was kind of an unexpected thing,
Drawback.
So trying to raise 3 kids as a single mom, and then getting a like a full-time job and stuff like that.
Right.
So she ended up trying to balance school and kids, but ultimately she had to give up her school. So I feel I feel a lot bad for that, So you kind of feel this expectation to make up for lost time or not accomplishments, but you know what I mean.
Right. Yeah, how were you? So it was you, your sister, and your brother, you said?
Yeah, I have a younger brother. I guess we're technically Irish twins, just like a 1 month overlap where we're the same age.
Okay.
And then my younger...
Well, then your parents were having some fun at some point.
Yeah, I mean, it must have been good at some point.
At some point.
Yeah.
And then your sister, older, younger?
Younger.
So you're the oldest?
And I am the oldest. Yeah, let me just give you that one.
Appreciate it. Your drawing, I should say...
are we starting now?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm recording.
Okay.
So you can keep going if you want.
Yeah. Actually, here, I'll drop these. It's going to make a lot of noise.
Okay. You're kind enough to sign some stuff for me, and you draw cool, amazing sketches.
They're okay, but you guys should still buy it. Yeah.
That's very nice, yeah?
Yeah.
You mentioned you had a deadline to yesterday.
I did.
What was the deadline for?
It was the dialogue for issue 3.
Okay, for Trinity.
For Trinity, yep. Clayman is drawing that one. So I just got some of the art. So usually I write the dialogue as I write the script and the layouts. But, usually you want to do a second pass once you get the art. That way it matches up more with what they drew in case they change certain things, Because, as an artist, I and as a comic fan, I hated when the words don't match the image, even just in subtle ways, right? And every artist they have a very subtle nuance to their art that when you write the dialogue, you want to be able to capture that,
Right.
So, and Clay's been amazing. His stuff is so cool. So.
Well, I mean, the Trinity book you're working on now, the first issue at least I read and I got a few copies of, and you write and draw it and ink it.
Yeah.
Why all that stuff? Like, isn't that a lot? I mean, isn't like
I colored it too,
and you colored it. So isn't the big problem? The biggest problem in comics is deadlines.
Sure.
And you have multiple people doing multiple, different jobs to meet those deadlines.
Yeah.
When you take a task like that all on your own, does that screw things up, or is it helpful?
Not for me.
It's okay. You could do that.
Well, let's put it this way. I'm not going to name an artist, but
Jim Lee. Go ahead.
No, not Jim. Not Jim. Jim's fast. Jim is just extremely busy.
Yeah.
Like I'm actually really fast.
Yeah.
So for me, handling all that stuff isn't a problem. But the problem we ran into was whenever you're rebirthing. I didn't say relaunch there. Whenever you're rebirthing a universe, there's a lot of stops and starts at the beginning.
Sure.
So I had anticipated to begin the book around, I believe, around March, April.
To begin
working on it, right? And I didn't actually get to start on art until late July.
Because?
Right? There were a lot of directional issues.
Okay.
Now we're getting into the meat and potatoes, I guess, of the story.
Okay.
But yeah, just behind the scenes stuff. Right.
Because they're rebirthing, as you said, the entire universe.
Sure.
So there's a lot of like, okay, well, we could do this with Trinity or whatever, and then they go, well, what if we, a week later, well, what if we did this? And then what is there's lots of changes and pivots.
Keep in mind as well, because I'm dealing with Trinity, I have to adhere to what they're doing in the Superman book, what they're doing in the Wonder Woman book, what they're doing in the Batman book, right? So, I mean, I don't...
How do you do that? That's crazy.
Well, that's why in the first issue, all they do is have dinner. Right?
Next issue, they're watching TV.
Well, that's the thing, right? With those other books, I had to figure out what their long-term plans were, right? So I reached out to a lot of the creatives on those books and kind of just filled out what it is they're doing with the character, where their character is at. So from there, you kind of know where to sidestep, right?
Okay.
So writing the Trinity, while it's incredible because they're the three most iconic characters, not just in DC, arguably the entire planet.
Yeah.
To me, let's say you were a prized fighter and you've been training all your life to go on this fight, right? And that's kind of how I felt about like finally getting these characters. And then because of certain continuity things and because of certain directional issues with some of the characters, now that you've entered the ring, you've just been told, hey, by the way, can we tie one hand behind your back, poke out your left eye,
right?
And also I'm going to take this hammer and I'm going to smash your left pinky toe.
Yeah.
Okay, go.
They're pretty rough over there.
They're pretty rough. But that's how it is, right? I could complain about it, but I remember going to the summit and like briefly Dan Jurgens was like, hey, welcome to comics. That's how it is, you know, and that is how it is, I could complain about it, and I did complain about it, but at the end of the day, these are the problems that you need to find solutions for, and in this case, those were problems that I needed to encounter to get to the story that we have now. Because I don't think we would have come to the story that we have now if I hadn't run into those problems. I think it would have been easy to fall into the trap of, oh, these guys are coming together, so let's figure out a really big threat, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the thing I couldn't get over in my head is that if something was so big, why just 3 of them? Why not like 7, 8, or 10, or 20
Justice
of them
League.
with the Justice League? Exactly.
Yeah.
So at that point, that couldn't be what the book was about, right? And around the time that I was writing it, I was going through a lot of changes. You know, I was becoming a father.
Oh,
You know,
congratulations.
And,
I didn't know that.
Thanks. Yeah.
Oh.
So I have a 4-month-old daughter now,
Wow.
and she's the best
Yeah.
creature to have ever
Aw.
existed. You know,
That's cute. What's your name?
and her name is Octavia.
Octavia. That's
so-
a comic book name.
Well, you know what's so she actually she has a really long version of her name.
Okay.
So and
That's short. Octavia's short.
that's the short one, yeah. So let me tell you, and I think you'll see where this is going. Right?
Okay.
So, and this is all by happenstance, complete coincidence. But any comic book fan, once I say the full name, they're gonna think, "Wow, you super nerd."
Okay, what is it? You guys.
So her name Octavia came from her Rachel's great grandmother's name, and
Rachel's your girlfriend.
Yes.
Okay.
And it just so happens as well that Octavia is the 8th girl born in a row from Rachel's side of the family.
Oh.
So it seemed very fitting for her name to be Octavia. And then...
She'll be a doctor, and you could call her Doc Ock.
Yeah, that'd be great. There you go. Well, she can bring home the bucks, right? I won't have to worry about her in the future. So, and her second name... Rachel's aunt passed away last year, and her name is Marion.
Man, my mom's
Marion.
name is.
Yeah,
Marion.
it's Octavia Marion, and it would have been just Octavia Marion Manapul. That's cool.
Sure.
But my mom, she has a tradition of having middle names with J. So my middle name is J.
Just
And
J.
there's no mystery. It's like Homer J. Simpson. It's just J-A-Y.
Okay.
And my brother is Franklin Julius, and my sister middle name is Joy. So we all have a J in the middle name. Is
your mom superstitious or something?
No. Well, you know what it was? My dad's first name started with an F, and her first name is Juliet. So her name started with a J. So they did this thing where the first names were the same letter as my dad's, and the middle names was...
Okay.
So I was cool with it not being carried on, and so was my mom. But Rachel felt bad because I let her choose the name. To me, it's not a big deal.
So it's her idea to add...
So she added
another-
Jane.
Jane.
So now
Marion
her
Jane.
name is
Jane.
Octavia Marion Jane Manapul. So you have...
Why not Rachel's last name and then Manapul?
well, she didn't want to do the hyphen.
Okay.
She didn't want to do the hyphen. I
Okay.
think, now that you have a daughter who seems like the biggest Spider-Man fan in the world, accidentally.
Your daughter is?
No,
because-
Octavia
Marion
Jane. Her name is
Mary Jane.
Octavia MJ. Doc Ock MJ. Yeah.
That's funny.
That's super comic booky.
That's great.
And and it's funny because like Spider-Man's my favorite character.
Yeah.
Marvel, but I think he's my favorite because he seems like a DC character in
Yeah.
Marvel universe.
Well, that's cool.
Completely coincidental.
My girlfriend and I, we've talked about having kids.
Yeah.
And we talked about names.
Yeah.
And I would love to have a boy. I'd be happy with a girl or a boy.
Sure.
But if I have a girl, I'd likely raise her like a boy, probably.
Yeah.
But my girlfriend likes the name Parker.
Yeah.
And I was kind of like iffy on the name. And
Yeah.
then she said, but I want him to have my father's first name as his middle name.
Okay.
And his name's Peter. So it would be Parker Peter. And I was like, sold.
All right, you win. You win this game. But Parker can also work as a girl's name.
Yeah.
I always thought that was like cool, when the girl has like a guy's name.
Yeah.
You know what? Like
probably Peter might lose the
Peter.
Peter.
Yeah, you might want to drop that. I'm
Yeah.
sure you can find like a more suitable one than that.
Something.
But you should, man. It's great.
I love that. Was it planned?
No, no. But you know what? It was the best accident
Sure.
that have ever happened.
Of course.
And it's funny because, like, Rachel, you know, everyone's like, oh, I want a girl, but she said, you know what, I'd be happy as long as they're healthy. That's the answer everybody gives. And that's the answer that I have, because I honestly didn't care. Actually, you know what? I was leaning towards a little bit more of a girl.
Oh, really?
Know, just because I watched Father Bride a little too much.
That's a great
movie.
movie.
And I like the idea of playing basketball with my little daughter.
That's cute.
Just minus the creepy stares that he had when he lingers, like, you know, thinking fondly of the past.
Yeah.
You know.
Great movie.
Yeah, so, you know, it wasn't planned, but again, it was... nobody plans to win the lottery ticket, and that's how we felt. You know, it just... Can I swear in this?
Sure, go ahead.
Shit, we won. You know, like, holy shit, we won, you know? And it's so funny, because, like, so we were going to try to do... And it's so trendy now, I hate it, but, like, people are doing the whole, like, we're going to do traditional, and we're not going to know until... Like, come on, screw that. I can't wait that long.
Yeah, no, I can't either.
So...
I need to know.
Exactly. So we had the doctor put it down on a piece of paper in an envelope and close it up, and then we were going to do like a reveal. But when we got home, Rachel couldn't wait. Right? So like, I thought we were going to do this for her family. She's like, no, I want it now. I don't want him to see me cry. Blah blah blah. And she goes, before I open it, she's like, whoa, wait. Just so you know I've been saying I want a daughter, but you know, I'll be happy. It doesn't matter. I'll love them the same, right? So then I open it, and I just stare at her. You know, I have a pretty good poker face, right?
Sure.
So I give her like a couple minutes. She's like, come on. And
You messed with her a little bit?
yeah, and then I said, it's a girl, right?
It's
so
a
she
bat.
just started bawling, right? And I think I have a video of it, and then I think I said, and you said you didn't care if it was a boy, right? And the funny thing was that a few hours later, she's just standing in the kitchen making a sandwich, you know, like someone's just looking off in space.
Sure.
And then I see her smile, and she just starts going while smiling, right? And I'm like, and you said you didn't care if it was a boy, right? So that was pretty funny. She was very, very elated,
Yeah.
you know, to have a daughter.
How long have you guys been together?
Just a little over 3 years now.
Okay. How'd you meet?
Yeah. How did we meet? You know what?
I remember.
I met her at a drink and draw.
A what? A drink and draw?
Yeah.
Is that a game?
Well, so
I mean, is it literal?
Toronto,
It sounds pretty literal.
No,
You drink while
I mean,
you draw
you're just in a
games?
bar and you're just drawing. You know, I think a bunch of guys in LA popularized that. You know, Dan
LA.
Panosian, Dave Johnson, all those guys have a drink. All it is that, hey, you're an artist, you want to get out of your house and have a drink and doodle.
Yeah, doodle.
That's what it is, right? So a friend of mine a long time ago started it here in Toronto because he was like, hey, that's a great idea. And then, you know, eventually I just fell out of it because I ended up working in a studio. And my studio mates and I are all really good friends. So we also drink and draw at the studio, but now we separate both.
Right.
Right? So, and it just so happens that this one night, you know, a friend of mine wanted to catch up with some friends. So I'm like, oh, yeah, I'll pop in. And I remember seeing this girl, and I'm like, she looks interesting. She looks nothing at all like, you know, everyone has like a type, right? You know, she had like a nose ring, and, you know, she just looked way more edgier than I do. Mm-hmm. And at no point did you imagine that the two of us would be together. You know, she's funny, she's outgoing. You know, I think I just sat there in the corner. You know, she said, you know, I think the first time I met you, you looked miserable. You looked like you hated being there. I'm like, no, I didn't know some of these people. You know, when you come late to a party, it's hard to just jump into the conversation. So I wasn't going to be, I wasn't going to be a disruptor. There was a flow, you know. So I just sat there and just took it in, you know. And then so that's how we first met. And then, you know, we just bumped into each other a few more times at different events throughout the city. And then
eventually you asked her out?
Eventually, well, you know, I was a little more sly. I did the whole, like, hey, this is where I'm going to be at. And this is, you know, if you want to come down.
Did you say, hey, I can draw Batman?
Well,
really, really good.
the funny thing is that I didn't have the heart to correct her, but the first time we talked at length, she thought that I worked on Daredevil. And she was like, well, I was a red character. So
That's
I'm
funny.
like, yeah, well, you know. Yeah,
It was
close
nice
enough.
of you to still give her a break.
Yeah. I didn't care.
Didn't care.
Yeah.
Speaking of
she could have said
Daredevil,
anything at that
Are you a
point.
Daredevil fan?
I
A little
am.
bit?
I love Daredevil.
Do you know
It's fantastic.
I was drawn in the latest issue of Daredevil?
I did. I saw on your
Did you
Facebook.
see that?
I saw that.
Pretty cool.
Congratulations.
Pretty cool.
Are they going to kill you in it?
Probably.
Okay, that's probably
Or I'll
true.
just disappear.
That's what happens to everybody that's drawn in a comic book.
But I'll just say I give DC permission to use my likeness in the Trinity book. Should you
Yeah.
choose to accept it? I'll just say that.
Well, you know what? As soon as they get off this farm and other people are introduced, the great thing about being on the farm is I don't have to draw anybody else but the three of them. So
Well, how quickly do they get off the farm? I mean, we could talk about the first issue. I read the first issue.
sure.
They're all on a farm. They're meeting Lois and Clark and their son John.
Yeah.
How long? By the way, I'm behind on comics. How long has John been around?
I think he's
Their
been
son.
around for a little over a year.
Oh, okay, yeah.
I think they introduced him in this book called Lois and Clark by Dan Jurgens.
Okay.
That was in the pre-52 era, right? And they were introduced as these strange visitors, I guess, and then eventually revealed that they were the pre-52 Superman family.
Oh,
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
So-
you see why we needed to rebirth the universe. So
Well, speaking of which,
Yeah.
so 52, that was only a few years ago. Right?
geez.
Restarting the 52 and all that stuff was like 2010, 11? Right?
something like that.
Something like that.
It felt like a long time ago.
Really? and then rebirthing again.
Yeah.
This is both restarts are because of the Flash, right?
Well, no, the New 52 kind of fell in line with what historically has happened in the DC universe, with the Crisis and
Right.
with the Flash essentially doing something to manipulate time.
Yeah.
Rebirth actually carries previous continuity in the New 52. So there's actually
okay.
so reboot or relaunch is not an appropriate word storytelling wise.
Okay.
Marketing wise, of course, it's a relaunch. Of
Right.
course it is, right? But from a story standpoint, it was more a fresh start for new storylines. But it still had the weight of all the previous continuities
Okay.
of New 52.
Okay.
But with this slight wrench that things from pre-52 were now in play, right? So Geoff Johns. He's a very, very clever man.
Mm-hmm.
So he's doing something within story that would explain these anomalies in people's memories of their past, which is why it's like, oh, why are we seeing some of pre-52 continuity and why are we seeing New 52 continuity? So he's going to solve it all in story,
Okay.
which is great because the thing about Geoff, I notice, is that he'll never just throw away something just
Right.
because it's time to rebirth something or relaunch. He always seems to take something from the past and find a story that will bring us to the present and how we got there, right? So that's what he'll be doing, and that's basically what he did in that rebirth, one shot. And I mean, I guess you're right. It was a big deal that Wally West came back, but this time it wasn't his fault.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, these Flash guys are trouble.
They're trouble.
They're going around changing time,
They mean well.
Sure.
They're like that relative that means well, but you're
and
like,
it fucks everything up.
yeah, just relax. Yeah.
Like, did you see the new? I guess you're watching watching Flash on the TV.
To tell you the truth, I've seen one episode.
Oh, that's okay.
I've seen the pilot, and I thought it was great.
Yeah.
They sent me the DVD, but I do most of my quote unquote TV watching while I'm drawing. So, and I tend to only watch what's on Netflix because it's there and it's easy on my computer.
Right.
And I don't know, maybe I'm I'm a little bit more typical in my TV watching in that once I'm not drawing, when I'm writing, I can't watch, so I listen to like movie scores and stuff like that. But when I'm drawing, I can just, and when I say watch, I mean mostly listen. Most of the time, I'll have been like listening to a show for a couple episodes, and then I'll look up just so I know what the characters look like.
Because your head's down, you're drawing.
Yeah, so for me, like, procedurals work really well. Like, I really like cop dramas and things that are very less action oriented. Yeah. Right. But when I'm not watching, I like to watch sports. So that's what I end up putting on my TV.
You're a hockey guy?
I should be because I'm from Toronto, but I'm not. I'm a more of a big basketball fan.
Oh, all right. Right on.
It's funny, when I first came to Canada, I loved hockey so much, and then I told my mom, and I was actually a pretty decent goalkeeper, So I told my mom, hey, but this is like foot hockey on the streets, not on ice, right? So I told her, like, hey, I think I want to play hockey. And so she looked into it, and if you know anything about hockey, being the goalkeeper or the goalie, that's the most expensive position to be in because of all the equipment.
Okay.
And she looked into it, she's like, this is too expensive. She's like, here's a basketball, right? And then I became a basketball fan. So now I have like this I'll groan about hockey, like, oh, I hate hockey. But it's like, it's almost like a scarred lover that's like, oh man, I hate him, but really you do love it, But now at this point, it's now embedded in me to love basketball, because it's funny, I started getting memories, like in the Philippines, there's basketball is pretty big.
Oh, really?
And my dad used to watch it all the time, and so I have like kind of lingering memories of hearing basketball games and seeing a few basketball games, and the teams there are interesting because unlike North America, where they are an entity unto themselves and are merchandising Mongol in their own right, like. I'm wearing a Raptors hat right now, right? So they make their own money, but in the Philippines, a lot of the teams are sponsored, right? So I remember there was this basketball team called Pure Foods, and I only liked them because I liked their hot dogs, right? So it's like, imagine if the NBA was like, I don't know, Seattle Kraft Dinners, or Toronto maple syrups, right? So that's delicious. It does, right? So that's how it was in the Philippines. All these teams are sponsored by, and they're like the major team in the Philippines. They're not like a little Pee-wee league thing,
What do you remember about the Philippines? Have you been back since?
I visited 10 years ago.
That was the last time.
Actually, maybe over 10 years ago. It's been a long time, and. When I was a kid, the things that you see are not necessarily the things that will dictate to you what that world or that city's like, right? You see it through a kid's lens, right? Everything's kind of a playground, Yeah. It's tough. Actually, that's what I remembered about being in the Philippines. It was tough times. It was lean times, My dad,
money and
everything, money, food, housing. Like, my dad had a lot of early success.
In what?
My dad
was a writer.
He was a writer. He worked in, I believe he started out in newspaper and radio, and then he started writing for television, and then he started writing and directing movies.
No shit.
And
wow.
That's cool. My dad is he's a very opinionated man.
Yeah.
And
Did that get him in trouble sometimes?
He got him in trouble a lot of times, And I remember when I was a kid, my mom and my dad they were wearing this yellow T-shirt that says "People Power," and I don't really remember what it was for, but only in hindsight did I realize that, the Philippines for the longest time was under a dictatorship. It wasn't a democracy. And that was when Marcos, this dictator, was in control. And I didn't know that I was still alive when that shift of power was happening, right? And I guess the yellow shirt that my parents were wearing, I guess they were marching earlier that day to, bring Philippines to a democracy rather than a dictatorship. And, when you're a kid, you don't know that. You don't remember that kind of stuff, right? So, and it's funny, going back to the original question, I was talking to my cousin over Thanksgiving. We just had Canadian Thanksgiving last weekend.
Happy Thanksgiving.
So, thanks. Yeah, we're living in the future up here. And she said, you were probably too young to remember, but yeah, your dad he had a lot of successes at the beginning. And I do remember some of those successes, It was very sporadic. I remember living in a really nice house, and we had, like, maids and stuff like that.
Oh, wow.
And then, from there to a drastic change of, like, oh, man, there's nothing for dinner, and I think it was, like, rice and, like, a banana, and you just put soy sauce on the banana.
What was the difference? Do you know?
I think it was around the time when, any artist or anybody in this field know that when work dries up, money stops coming in. Right?
Did he save? Was he a good saver?
Well, my father was kind of like a Rolling Stone. He also had a previous family prior to us. He had, so I have 4 older stepbrothers and sisters.
Oh, I see.
So I think he was helping them out go to school, and they had decided to go to school in America, right? So
expensive schools.
And so I think between him helping on that, and sometimes artists don't know that the good ride might run out, you know? So I think he was also living it up. Well, I don't know if living it up is right, because he was always a simple man. I don't really remember living extravagantly, Here's the thing,
He had, like, 7 kids to take care of.
Yeah, I don't ever remember feeling well off when I was a kid, And I don't remember feeling very poor either. The only times I could remember was that, occasionally this one night for dinner, we didn't have anything. And dinner was literally rice with banana, And I didn't know that was, like, lean times. When you're a kid and your parents and you're surrounded with family and cousins that are of similar financial situations, but, the cousins on my mom's side of the family, we were very, very close, so it was, it just felt like fun, when you're a kid, right? It's interesting to realize that it's up to the parent to try to make the kid not feel that way, right? I mean, of course, we moved around a lot when we were when I was a kid, so you kind of do notice, but you don't really think about that kind of stuff. You don't think about money. You just know that, oh, this isn't as good as last time,
right?
But whatever.
But maybe all that strained the marriage.
Well, there were other things that I'll stop at that. There's other things that my dad did that caused the fall of the relationship with my mom.
Okay.
And my dad is sometimes he seems very much like a fictional character from, like, a Humphrey Bogart movie, where he's very flawed, but the thing is that he also had a very bad temper. He was a very emotional guy, and the interesting thing is that what made him a really good writer sometimes also detracted from the family life. Because and I only understand now as an adult. I didn't understand him at all. When I was a kid, all I remembered was that when he was away, he'd be shooting or doing something, and then he would be back, and then when he's back, I just remember he would smoke cigarettes all night and write all night and listen to basketball in the background. That was my memory of him.
Right.
You know, and there were the occasional moments where I remember he brought me on set once, but I didn't care. I was a little kid. You know, you don't care. This isn't cartoons.
Yeah.
What do I care?
It was a movie set or something?
I think it was a movie set.
Did you ever watch any of the movies that he wrote? Or
You know, I've only seen one. It was a comedy.
Yeah.
Um,
funny?
Yeah, I guess so. It was funny. It was called in Tagalog. It's called isang platito na mani, which means a plate of peanuts.
Okay. That was dinner.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, no, it was a comedy, and the other stuff he did, I was way too young to watch, so I've never seen any of them.
Okay.
Right, but that was the last movie I remember him working on, because after that, I think he really got into politics, you know, but more of as an activist, it seems, you know, and I don't know all the details because my dad never shared that with us. You know, it was a very traditional, hey, do this, do that. You know what I mean? Like, you know that he cares, but
the way he was raised,
yeah, it was very traditional, it was almost uber masculine, you know, where you don't say how you feel, you just
or show it.
Exactly. To him, his job was to provide. Yeah. And on top of that, his job was to provide within the confines of the talent that he had and what he wanted to do.
Right.
Right. And I think a lot of people will think that anybody in a field that they love doing, specifically in the arts, they think, oh, you know what, you get to provide for your family and do what you love. And this is absolutely true, right? It's an amazing thing to have, and I would never trade it. But there are certain things that I only understand now as a parent and as an adult where, you know what, it almost would have been easier if I just went to work today at 9 and left at 5 and left it there, right? But imagine you're trying to write something that is meant to be uplifting and hopeful, but at that point in time you're feeling anything but those things. Yeah. But guess what? You have to write that day in order to get paid, right? So that's when it feels very much like a job. And I know it sounds like a very boo-hoo-hoo, you get to write these characters, but it's a real struggle, right? Because at that point, when you're not in the right frame of mind to write something like that, it's difficult.
Well, I wonder the temperament that your dad had.
Yeah.
He wasn't allowed to show emotion except maybe the anger that would spurt out from probably stifling other emotions.
Yeah.
And plus he was clearly an artist.
Yeah.
And had pressures trying to be successful in certain avenues, and maybe it came and went, and you know that could have been very frustrating. I'm providing for all these mouths.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I could see how that could be really tough.
Well, that's the thing, is that, you know, it's like that Seinfeld thing, Serenity Now, right? It doesn't work, right?
And it's also a alcoholic AA thing.
Sure.
You know.
Sure. Yeah. Well, that's the thing. At least my dad never fell into that trap of, you know, I'm a writer. Here, let me have a couple drinks. You know, he was his biggest vice was his anger. You know, and so I think that
80s.
that too, apparently. You know, I mean, he was in films, right? So, and you know, you know how it is, right?
Sure.
So I think he. You know, it's different because again we're talking about a different time. My dad,
different country,
different era,
culture.
You know, different culture, and to him, it's
like another universe.
Sure,
like
exactly.
Earth 63 or something.
Exactly, and I think around the time, and this is me speculating, right? Mm-hmm. This is me speculating because he never talked about it. And this was before social media and internet, so there's no like records of this. So if anybody knows the history of my dad, feel free to chime in. But if I were to speculate, I think around the time that just before we left the Philippines. That was when he was starting to struggle a little bit. But I have a feeling that was probably around the time that he was probably experiencing his biggest artistic growth, because I think he was becoming more political. He was becoming very opinionated about how he felt about things. And I think he wanted his work to reflect that way. And I wouldn't be surprised if that's what prevented him from getting certain jobs or this or that, because when I left, he just, I'm sure being a parent now and to have your kids leave, that is the most painful thing you could think of.
Because he didn't have any around, right? The four moved to the States.
The four moved to the States.
Canada.
Yeah, and then so he went from having 7 kids to none.
Wow.
And
did he have any more kids?
He did.
Okay.
He did. There's now 2 more.
In the Philippines?
In the Philippines, yeah, 2 more younger siblings. And, at least we know that we're virile.
Did your parents ever officially get divorced, or did they stay separate?
Well, they never officially got married.
Oh, they never officially got married?
No.
Was he still married to that other woman that had his first
I don't
kids?
know.
Oh, really?
I don't know.
That's interesting.
It's funny. So I kind of grew up in a culture of, even though, in the Asian culture, that's the typical thing. Oh, you get married, you have kids. But keep in mind, I grew up with a dad who was a writer and a mom who's an artist. Right. So it was anything but your typical arrangement of family structure. So I kind of grew up in a non-marriage household. Right. And, I'm kind of the opinion that, look, I know a lot of people are going to say, no, it's not true. That's not how it is. And I said, and I think they're probably right. But, a part of me is sort of like, when you live together, it's almost like you're married. The only thing missing is the piece of paper. Right. And for me, once I move in with somebody, I'm all in. I put in all my chips.
You're committed.
Right? I'm committed. Yeah. Exactly. I mean, there's no paperwork saying so. Yeah. Technically there is. When you live long enough, you're legally common law.
I guess.
Right.
I don't know if
a little bit
how that stuff works.
I don't know how it works, but so I grew up in a family of non-marriage,
right? Non-traditional
marriage, right? Don't get me wrong. Like now, when I introduce Rachel as my girlfriend, who is the mother of my child, it does not. The girlfriend does not seem big enough to describe her as that. Right. So now some people say, oh, your wife, and I don't correct them. I just say, yeah, sure, and I kind of only now do I get where it's like, what, if I had thoughts before, but once the kid happens, it kind of you're always gonna have doubts like, oh, did you propose because we have a kid, right? So even though I had thoughts of those before, it's too late now, right? It's like, imagine if you were offering to pay the check, but the person already took out their wallet, and then you go for a reach. It's like, yeah, that's cool.
Right.
Like, even though I know you had full intention to do it, but the person who's paying don't know whether it's just a gesture or whether you really meant it, and you could very much mean it, but at that point it's too late. But right now my thoughts are a little bit different on that. Now that we have a kid, I actually do feel that marriage does sound pretty good, and it makes you feel like it's a less romanticized version of marriage, I guess, where my brain is thinking that if we got married, it's you can say, oh, you're doing it because of a kid. It's like, well, it's partially that, but it's mostly because I want to show that I'm committed. I'm all in.
Sure. Well, I like the idea actually of, like, my parents got married, and I see pictures, and I'm not in it. And but it's clearly this important thing that happened in their lives, but that I'm not a part of. And so I kind of like the idea of having kids first and then getting married, because then they can be there, they can share it.
Yeah, and you know what? I don't know. Maybe this is also the practical side of me. Weddings are expensive. And
I mean, they can be. They could also
they
go to City Hall.
be. Exactly, yeah. That's the thing, right? So, you know, I feel that buying a house in the city could not prove any more that I'm committed to this family life, right?
Right.
You know, like
having a kid too. I mean,
having a kid and you know, settling like real roots, you know. So we bought a house in the city and a house in the city. Those two words strung together equals you're in debt for the rest of your life,
right.
you know.
You're gonna be drawing a lot of Batman.
Sure, exactly. And you know what? I would rather have a house and a roof over the head of my family than, oh man, we had a really great time, we had a fantastic party, and here are the photos to show for it.
Right,
you know,
right.
For me, I'm like, you know what? We have a
It's
house.
more practical.
Yeah, you know,
I mean, I don't know how it works in Canada, but there's tax breaks in the States. If you get married, you save some money on taxes. So that could be a incentive.
Oh yeah,
too.
well yeah, sure.
You could run to City Hall, sign some papers, get tax breaks, save more.
Yeah. Well, essentially, I think once you're legally together as an entity, that's when you tax tips everybody. That's when you start. I believe it's called income splitting. Right. So where you take the I guess the accumulation of both income and you put it in one pile and then you split that and then that's what's taxed, you know. So
I think if anybody has any questions about marriage, they should let us know.
Yeah.
And getting married and
and taxes.
We'll start a new column, like a love column.
Sure, you know.
Did your mom ever remarry? Or have more kids?
No. I mean, she's with she's been with the same man for many years since I was in high school, and they never got married. But I consider him my stepfather, and we still celebrate Father's Day with him. They also they too never got married, but you know, for me, things like that, those are just words. Those are just ceremonies that. I feel like those things are for other people, but you know, when you throw those parties, you know, I'm sure you've been to those things. You know that all they care about is like, oh man, are people gonna like this food? Are people gonna like this? You know, it's more about like showing people like, oh look, this is our love, blah 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 blah. But for me, showing your love is in the everyday things and doing the things that you do to keep that unit functioning. You know, and I think my mom and Steve have functioned very, very well together. And so now it's like I have two dads. You know, I have the dad that that more or less is my biological father, who I knew for 9 years of my life. And then there's my my dad, his name is Fundador Soriano. So unfortunately, we don't use his last name because once we split, we took on my mom's last name. Okay. So in the Philippines, I guess my name was Francis Soriano. And then when we moved to Canada, it was Francis Manapul. And, so now I have... the stepdad who more or less was there during high school to now adulthood, right? So he was there during the important growth and experience that you go through, right?
He was there to ask advice.
And the thing was, he was very level-headed. He is actually the opposite of my biological dad. You know, he's very cool and calm and collective, and I think those are the qualities I think about him that my mom really liked. You know?
Do you take on those qualities as a father yourself now? Do you see more of your stepdad or more of your combination of both?
I think it's a combination of both. Yeah. You know, like I am my father's son, and I do have, as much as we want to say, nature versus nurture, I think there is still a little bit of nature that seeps in, you know, because there's certain qualities about my temperament that is very much like my dad's. You know, I don't think I go as far as him, you know, because, you know...
See, for like hands on? Did he ever use?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, look, that was normal back then.
Yeah.
You know, like, you know, but it was just normal.
Sure.
It was just normal back then. I didn't think it was a big deal.
Right.
You know, so I mean, I would never do that. But for back then, I think anybody probably born pre-'80s, that was probably normal.
Yeah.
You know, like when you see some of that stuff on TV and you see a parent do it, you're like, oh, no big deal. Now you're like, holy shit, did they just fucking do that?
Yeah. My dad had he had a temper too.
Yeah.
I mean, he wasn't like abusive, but I got spanked a few times. And,
sure.
You know, smacked on the
that was normal. You know, slippers, smacking. Right. You know, that's just belt. Yeah, that was just. You know, you just knew not to do anything bad. You know, but it's weird because to some people, they're like emotionally scarred by it or whatever, and I would understand that, but I don't know. It never occurred to me that it should have been emotionally scarring. Maybe I don't want to belittle anybody that is affected by it because it's a very serious thing. But you know, I don't want to. So I'm hesitant to say that maybe we were stronger emotionally. You know, because again, I don't want to belittle anybody that has an emotional reaction to it.
Sure.
But for me, it's honestly in my brain. You know what I mean? That's how it was back then.
Yeah.
You know, and I can't.
You've accepted
fathom. Yeah, exactly. I can't fathom lifting hands.
Did you ever go to therapy or anything? You ever do any of that?
No, what for? I'm perfectly fine.
I don't know. I go to therapy.
That's what this work is for, right?
Yeah, is that therapeutic?
You know, it absolutely is, and it's funny because one of the best advice I got in writing was also from Geoff Johns, and he said, you know, write what you know, right? But
he didn't come up with that, by the way.
Of course not. But
is he claiming he came up with that? He didn't come up with that.
No. But I think when I asked him, like, listen, you know, what's the one thing you would tell me to just remember? And that was it. And you know, when he told me that, you know, like, yeah, okay, cool, I got this. I know what he's talking about, and I didn't. For the first few years, I didn't. I knew the words. I knew what he meant, but I didn't know it. You know, I had a superficial understanding of it, right? So when I was working on The Flash, I knew enough that, okay, I don't know what it's like to be fast, but I know what it's like to feel overwhelmed. So the first arc of The Flash was the physical embodiment of a villain who could be everywhere at once, because as fast as The Flash was, he couldn't be everywhere at once. So that was me sort of putting my feelings in and feeling I was overwhelmed. I was overwhelmed by the opportunity, and there were a lot of things happening in my life around that time, you know. And then eventually, when I was in a 7-year relationship, and when that was ending, it did translate into the story, because around this time, you know, I was staying in a different apartment, because, you know, we were living together, and we were starting to get our shit in order, right? Sure. So in order to give each other space, I rented a different place out. So this story ended up being about the Flash being displaced from home. He was trapped in the Speed Force, trying to find his way back, you know. Now, I think I had the intent of writing what I knew with the feelings that I had, but I didn't have the abilities yet to execute them properly, you know. So I think of the Flash very, very fondly, because each arc represents a different part of my life and what I was going through. So I could tell you what each trade paperback represents and what I was feeling. But when I realized, when you read the material, I didn't execute properly, you know. And with Trinity, I feel like I now have that accumulative knowledge. So I feel like I'm starting to execute closer to what my intent was. I didn't lose myself in the plot and the action, because in The Flash it was very easy to lose myself in the plot, you know, because I wanted the book to be, it's The Flash, it needed to be action packed, it needed to be fast, but it was at the expense of the emotional weight that I wanted to give the story. So with Trinity, it was a very simple beginning. You know, it wasn't the three of them lifting a building or a world. It was them having dinner because these
reconnecting.
Yeah, and that's the thing. These characters are larger than life, and the personalities that they each have, and the differences in those personalities. That's where the drama was, and that's where the action is. You know. So, issue 2 was the first thing that I wrote that I really, really felt strongly about, because around the time that I wrote it, my dad fell ill, and he had been in and out of the hospital. So it was the first time I wrote something and I cried. You know, and I don't want to put weight. I don't want to put weight that it's going to make you cry when you read it, but it certainly moved me. And it sounds pompous to say that about your own work, but I don't think so. I don't think it was an emotional reaction because it was good, and I realized it was an emotional reaction because it was honest. Yeah, I think it was the first time I wrote with extreme honesty. You know, I think The Flash and all those other things, it was me writing about my feelings, but it was me writing about writing in a way that made those feelings seem grand and epic, you know, and then it would get lost in the plot. But the second issue of Trinity, there was no grand and epic plot to it. It's just a father, or in this case, Clark. He is a father, but in this scenario, he gets a chance. Well, he gets a chance to reconnect with his father.
His father, who he named his son after.
He named his son after him. So at the end of issue 1, we see this mirror, and we see Clark see a younger version of himself and his father
at the last
page, right? Yeah. And in issue 2. I don't know when this is coming out, but you know what? I'll send you the books. That way you can check it out.
I'll probably put this up in a couple weeks.
Okay, it might be out around that time. Okay. But you know what? Screw it. Let's talk about it, right? Yeah. So, and then it's going to be weird for you because you're going to read it after we have this talk.
That's okay. Can I ask real quick what your dad fell ill with?
He had respiratory lung issues because he was a smoker. Yeah. He was like a pack-a-day smoker since he was a teenager. Wow. You know, but he, you know, it's don't smoke, kids.
Yeah. Did you ever smoke?
No, never.
That's ever. I smoked for 15 years.
Really? Yeah. Wow. Good for you.
I quit 11 years ago.
Wow, good for you.
Thank you.
That must have been pretty difficult.
It was tough. It took many times.
Yeah, a lot of stops and starts.
A lot of stops and starts. Yeah. A lot of okay, I'll only smoke if I'm drinking, or I'll only smoke. I won't buy any. I'll just grub off other people. And then eventually it was just I just got to stop all of that.
There's always an excuse. Like, just one time. So what caused you to stop? Health issues or?
Well, I started noticing my laugh started becoming a little wheezy.
Really?
And I was developing like a little cough, like every once in a while, I'll go just like something like that.
Yeah.
And I noticed that on other smokers. And when you do it long enough, it's permanent. Mm-hmm. And I was like, shit, I don't want that. I don't want every time I laugh to be like... So that was really like, all right, I gotta stop. And then they were banning it everywhere.
So it made
prices went up.
Right. I wouldn't say it made it easier, but it made it
like, this is
sense.
the time. This is definitely the time. And now I look at other people, I'm like, how do you smoke now? It's 2016. I can't even believe it.
It feels very antiquated. I remember the first time I went to Europe when I was a kid, people were smoking in the airports. And that was normal back then.
Yeah.
I remember think about it now.
I was born in 75.
Yeah, it's now it's just weird.
It's weird. When I even go in like another state and they're smoking indoors, I'm like, what the fuck?
What are they doing, right?
Where am I?
Well, I mean,
I can't even stand it. I have to leave.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully that's where society will go. Is that they'll go, wow, who does this thing,
Yeah.
right?
You ever go to Tokyo?
No,
I went
I'd
to
love
Tokyo earlier this year,
Yeah.
and in some parts, there's no smoking outdoors.
Oh, wow,
There's
okay.
signs you can't smoke even in
Yeah.
certain neighborhoods. You just can't. Whole neighborhoods. You
I don't know
can't
what it's
smoke.
like in Canada. Oh, in the whole neighborhoods. Wow.
Yeah.
Because I was gonna say, like in Canada, you're not supposed to smoke within a certain distance from an entryway.
Okay.
Right. Because like, okay, sure, you're smoking outside, but really, if you're making people smell it as you're going in and out of a building, that's not really helping much either.
No. It's
You
gross.
know? It is. But that's good. Good for you, man.
Thank you.
That's amazing.
Thank you. And good for you for not even trying it. So that's good for you.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I grew up around it. That was my childhood, was smelling cigarette and hearing all night. That was it.
Old school typewriter.
That was my childhood.
And basketball.
And basketball.
And and so your dad, I'm sorry to say, passed away.
He did.
A couple days ago.
He did. Yeah.
And when was the last time you saw him?
I went back to the Philippines.
So over 10
a little
years.
over 10 years ago.
So that was the
And
last time you saw him.
Yeah,
Wow.
so I mean, I guess it was a long time ago.
Yeah.
And we remain in touch because as my father fell ill and didn't have as much work, we stayed in contact, and primarily it was because I helped financially,
Okay.
and I feel fortunate enough to be in a position to do that, and and I know how much pride he has, and I know that it hurt him to ask, especially a son that I guess like my brothers and sisters, we never got some of the things that our stepbrothers and sisters got. We never had that support. While we were with him and we lived with him, he was a good provider. But once there was that separation, there was no continued support. There was no
Right.
support when my mom was struggling and we were here in Canada, And it's funny because when you're here in Canada, the struggle felt more real. You felt more poor. In the Philippines, even though we were probably poorer, I felt poorer when we were here growing up, just because of the standards of living, right?
Sure.
I remember when I was a kid in the Philippines, and when they had separated, my mom was living with my aunt, and they had this great house, and it was a quaint house, and I loved it because they had like chickens playing in the yard, and they had all these dogs, but it was very old school. So to take a shower, first of all, I didn't even know what a shower was, because they had their own well, and you got the water out of it, and then you would boil the water, then you would put it in a bucket, and that's how you would bathe yourself, right? And to me, that was normal. Only coming to North America did I realize, man,
It's so much easier. You could just turn his.
I guess we were poor, but you didn't feel like it.
Well,
it was,
I mean,
it was a
different in
different standard
places.
of living.
Yeah.
Exactly. So I didn't feel it, right? So here I was in Canada, where I could turn on a faucet and take a shower, but I felt poorer.
Yeah.
Because when you go to school and you're wearing, like, at this point, 4th or 5th hand-me-down and stuff. So, but it's, I don't know, it never really bothered me until I was here and I realized, there is kind of a...
Stupid Canadians.
There is kind of a discrepancy, but, whatever.
That's interesting.
Right? And then, I'm going on a tangent here. So my dad, about 10 years ago, my brother decided to go back home because my brother is an artist as well. He's a fine artist, but
Working comics at all?
not at all. He does fine art.
You trying to draw him in comics? Or something?
I've tried. I said we can be like the Kuberts or something. And I know if he were to come into comics, he would be more of a Vertigo guy
Oh,
because his stuff is very mixed media, painting, sculpting, you know, and it's very different. It would be like Dave McKean like kind of stuff, you know, but I don't think he's that interested.
Yeah.
You know,
if he's happy with doing what he's doing.
yeah, if he's anything like my dad, none of us will do anything if we don't like doing it. And same thing with my mom; she's like that as well.
Yeah.
You know, we're unhirable unless we want to do it. You know, and
so he wanted to go back.
he wanted to go back because
And that was the first time you guys would go back since you left.
Yeah. Well, he came back before I did. He went to live there for
Oh, he did.
I
Okay.
believe maybe half a year because he wanted to get into acting. And
Philippines.
yeah, and you know, my dad still had old connections to this
Okay.
stuff.
Interesting.
So I went to visit, and at that point, when I came to visit, my dad wasn't in films and TV anymore. At that point, he was editor-in-chief of a magazine, but it was like one of those entertainment tabloid type of magazine.
Okay.
You know.
Inquirer.
Yeah, like that kind of
Yeah,
stuff. You know, so
He's like, did you hear about Brad Pitt?
well, I think obviously that's what the columns were, and I think he I'm sure he did it because money,
pay a bill,
had to
yeah.
pay the bill, but I think it also gave him a sounding board to write what he wanted. So he had an article where he seemed to just do whatever he wanted.
What's it like going back after all that time and not seeing your dad for so
Yeah.
long? What's it like after 15, 16?
It was it was super emotional because it's he's still my dad, regardless of the distance and regardless of not seeing him, he's my father, and you just have this connection regardless of what you've been through, and you just feel love. You can't help it. It's a physical reaction to feel, and so I was hesitant. I was afraid. A part of me didn't want to go back, and I went because my brother needed support. So I went, and I loved it. I didn't regret it at all.
How long did you stay?
I was there for I think like a month.
Oh, a long
something
time.
like that. Yeah, it was a little while, and
And you stayed with your dad?
I stayed with my dad,
Wow.
and it was weird because at this point in time I'm I was around somewhere in my 20s.
Yeah.
And he was so traditional that I couldn't go out. You know what I mean? Because he was afraid. This big bad world of the Philippines, and it was. The Philippines can be a very dangerous place if you don't know where you're going, or you know what I mean. And having been there since when I was a kid and being sheltered, it was a very different experience. I didn't think I would have culture shock, but I did. Because at this point, my formative years were done growing up in Canada.
Right.
So when I came back, I did suddenly feel like, holy shit, this is not home. This feels strange. It does feel kind of scary, but it was fun. But it was very limiting because my dad's like, oh, you can't go out at night. So I didn't go out at night. I'm a 20-year-old man in a different country, and I couldn't go out at night.
Do you know the language?
I do, yeah. I can understand 100%. Speaking it, I would say I'm at about 80% proficiency. But there's certain things that I just don't know, and a lot of it are mundane words that just wouldn't come up. And apparently, not speaking the language for so long, you do have an accent, and my dad is a very, very cautious man, so he's like, as soon as you speak, you're like a target, and my mom and dad, they're super paranoid about that kind of stuff.
Sure.
And but yeah, it was interesting because when I went, we went to this student tie event where my dad won some award for something like Media Man or something like that. And it was interesting because around that time I also met this actor who even I remember too, even when I was still a kid, you know, this comedian in the Philippines that it's, you know, I guess it's almost like imagine like meeting Steve Martin now or something like that. You remember watching his movies when you were a kid, and then you know you don't
Father of
see
the Bride.
anything. Yeah, exactly. There you go. Right, and then all of a sudden here you are. You're like, oh man, this I remember this guy when I was a kid.
Yeah.
You know, and then it was kind of cool seeing him like shake my dad's hand, like contemporaries and stuff like that, and so that was pretty cool. But yeah, I think that was the last time I saw him, and
Did you leave with a new perspective of your father with that visit?
yeah, well, because he was still angry when we would drive. He had like the worst road rage ever.
Right.
And the funny thing was, he wasn't even the one driving. He wasn't a passenger, but he had the worst road rage. But he seemed like a changed man. You know, his new wife, she was very happy, and his kids were very happy, and they seemed to.
Did they marry? He married her?
Good question. I don't know.
Okay, you said wife, so.
Yeah,
it's just
wife,
a term.
girlfriend.
Sure.
It's all words, right?
Right.
So yeah, he seemed to have been a changed man, but I think a lot of it had to do with the realization that 2 previous wives left him with their kids. So at that point, to not be self-reflective and realize that you are doing something wrong would be just either you're ignoring it or you're just an idiot, you know. And I think that he kind of I guess he learned, you know.
Yeah, he grew.
And he grew, exactly, and that's why I said he felt like a character from some movies in the 50s where he's a flawed character, and eventually they overcome that flaw, but they're still who they are, right? So he's still the same grumpy old man that he was at the beginning, smoking cigarettes, but now with the knowledge that certain actions cause certain reactions, and those reactions left him with, you know, a third family. And I'm sure he doesn't regret having a third family, because, you know, he is obviously happy when he has kids around, but I'm sure he regrets us leaving, you know. But I feel that it changed him. So, you know, for me, it felt weird and somewhat cathartic, because I feared going, because you know, at this point in time, you know, we had lost touch for a while, and for me, he was a stranger, and I, in my brain, you know, it took us a long time to get over leaving, because I didn't want to leave. I didn't want to leave my dad. You know, I knew his faults, but he's still my dad. I didn't want to leave when I was a kid. So having overcome those feelings, I didn't want to go back. You know, I didn't want to go back because I don't want to feel these things again. You know, but in order to see my brother who was having a tough time, I went.
Did you also want any type of closure when you went over? Was there anything like that?
You know, closure is an interesting word, because that's something that I'm struggling with right now.
Because of his passing?
Of my dad's passing, you know, and I don't know if I went, you know, 10 years ago, I don't know if I went back because of closure. I think I went back because I felt like, you know, this is very like, I don't know, screenwriting 101, which is you have the character do the thing that they fear the most, you know. And I just felt like, why am I scared to see my own dad?
Yeah.
So I went, you know.
That's good though, I think.
Yeah, I think so. But I mean, you go through spurts of overcoming that, and then every now and then you revert back, you know. So I went, and yeah, I had a great time. I'm very glad I got the opportunity to reconnect with my dad and see him as this changed man. You know, he was better. I mean, a lot of the personalities that was there will always be there, and it was still there, but he was different, and I could feel the difference, you know. But at the same time, I knew that I couldn't stay there. I couldn't live there, you know. We're different people at this point, you know. But it was good to see where he was at, you know.
So you've seen him one time in almost 30 years.
Yeah.
Basically. And so you talk about closure now. Like, what do you think you need closure for? Do you know? What do you think?
Well, I feel like I don't know, you know, because actually when I found out that my dad died, 20 minutes prior to that, I found out that a friend of mine had died.
Yeah, and then Brendan?
Brendan Yap. He
29 years old?
He was only 29, yeah.
He died of?
He had brain cancer.
Oh, Jesus.
And that was a train that you couldn't stop, you know, and it was just way too young, you know, and so when I found that out, 20 minutes later, I found out about my dad, and I was immediately filled with a lot of regret because earlier this year, I had an opportunity to go to a convention in the Philippines, Manila, and it was in August, but, you know, Rachel and I, we just had our baby, and it would have been too difficult to go, and I didn't want to go without my family. You know, I would have wanted to bring them,
especially a newborn.
Yeah, exactly. You know, there's a lot of things still going on in the house that I can't not be there for. I remember when I went to San Diego, I was away for 5 days, and while for 2 days it felt good because you got away from that responsibility, on the third day I felt like nothing but guilt. So I couldn't do it unless Rachel and Octavia came with me, and
your priorities are different now.
Sure, and I think that's the surface answer, you know. But I think going back to the whole being scared of going back, I think a part of me was kind of scared of going back again, you know, because I felt like we, you know, in the latter part of my relationship with my father, it became more about financial dependence on me than familial kind of, you know, and it just felt weird, you know, when your dad greets you happy birthday a month before your actual birthday, you knew that it was because he was asking for money, you know, and I hate saying this, you know, but a part of me was starting to feel like I was just being used, you know.
You were resenting him.
And, yeah, you know, and the thing was, it didn't occur to me that it must have been really tough for him to ask, you know, knowing who he was. And
he was just too sick to work. And
yeah, he was just too sick to work. But the thing was, I didn't, and, you know, and around that time, it was his daughter that was texting me, and his wife. So I didn't know, you know. I started thinking like, oh, are they just using me? You know what I mean? I don't know. I didn't know the truth anymore, you know. And I remember also helping.
Well, it's weird. I mean,
yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but you see the guy once in 30 years practically, and then he's asking for. Sure, he's your dad, but it's like, hey, buddy, you know. Yeah, I'm also, you know, I don't know how. It sounds like you guys didn't have a lot of contact over the years.
No, I mean,
Was he contacting you more in these last years?
In the last year,
purposes?
yeah. But the thing is,
that's rough.
I've been helping them out,
and plus he's got like 100 other kids that
he does.
You know, maybe if you all chipped in, it'd be one thing.
Yeah, but I think his relationship with some of my other stepbrothers and sisters were much more strained than ours was.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
More than yours was? Holy
but
shit.
I think, you know, but I mean, I've been helping them out for years.
Wow.
But it just got more and more frequent in the last year.
Is that over now? Now that he's passed?
I don't think it will be, because I do I'm like, I'm the worst in that I tell Rachel, I'm like, you know what, I will. You know, she says, you know, you're a good person. And I said, no, I'm not a good person, and I'll tell you why I'm not a good person. And I said, I'll do the right thing because I have to do it, but I'm not going to enjoy doing it. I'm going to complain, but I'll still do it because I know I have to.
But the right thing isn't you taking care of these people. You know,
sure,
that you don't know.
But that's the thing though, right? Is I do know them the month that I spent with them. You know, they're people, and then you know, I think when my mom spoke to my dad, his last wish was to, like, you know, for us to help his family out. So I'm not gonna do that. You know, I don't think, you know, my younger stepsister, she's kind of following in my dad's footsteps, and she's in film school. You know, so I helped out a bit, and so that way she could finish filming something, and.
You're a better man than I am. If you're not a good man, well, I'm really not a good man.
But you know what though? It's weird, you know, like to when you're in a position that you can, why shouldn't you? You know, and the struggle that I'm going through right now is it's two things, right? I want to go back for closure. I want to say goodbye to my dad.
You gonna go for the funeral?
Well, here's the part that I've been thinking about, is that my mom is saying, listen, you know, it's too late. He's gone. Why do you need to go back? The amount of money that it's going to cost to fly to the Philippines, more or less in a couple days.
Right.
That could fund your stepsister's college probably for, like, I don't know how much it costs there in the Philippines, but I'm sure a few $1,000 is going to be like a lot once you convert it in pesos, you know. So right now the struggle is and the thing is that I could do both, right, and give a little, or I follow up on what my dad wanted and give a lot, but sacrifice the opportunity to say goodbye. But the thing is, my mom is saying that it's too late. There's no, you know what I mean? So she's thinking practically, right? Yeah. Which is that, look, he's gone. You can't say goodbye anymore. So the smart thing to do would be to take that money it's going to cost to go there and just give it to his family, you know, and your stepsister. And the thing is that, sure, I could do both, right? But if I chose not to do the flying part, I could give more, a substantial more. You know what I mean? So,
sure.
You know what I mean? So now I'm kind of...
I mean, you think you'll be helping out these people for the rest of your life, or their life? Or,
I don't know.
Are you in a trap? Are you trapped in doing this? Are you in a guilt trap?
Yeah, I mean, I felt that way. I think, you know... I'll be honest. Like,
now you got a family, you got a daughter.
Sure. But, you know, I'll be honest. Part of the reason why I didn't want to go to the Philippines for the convention was like,
You gotta deal with that stuff.
I didn't want to deal with that. You gotta
tell people no or yes, you know, and they're just gonna try to get some cash out of you.
You start feeling, I don't know. This feels weird to be talking about this, but I probably need to talk about it. I don't want to paint them in the wrong picture.
Sure.
You know, that they're there purely to ask me for money, you know, because if I said no, I'm sure they would have been like, cool, you know.
Okay.
But the thing was, I had the ability to help, so I was going to help, you know. I think it was only in this last year where I started feeling kind of weird about it, because it was becoming more frequent, and because it wasn't my dad texting me, it was my stepsister and his wife. I started feeling unsure whether this was like a genuine thing, you know. But I still sent it anyways, because a part of my brain said, you know what, I'd rather not know if this is real or not, so here you go, right? I didn't know that my dad's illness was actually as serious as it was. You know, I thought, you know, when he's been going in and out of the hospital for many years because of his illness, it becomes the norm.
Right.
it doesn't occur to you that this last visit is the last visit, So right now I'm filled with a lot of regrets because I feel like I should have gone to that convention because that would have been the last time I would have had the opportunity to see my dad. But I didn't know. I didn't know that he was that sick.
It still wouldn't have changed. I mean, you still had responsibilities. And
Sure,
newborn and all that stuff.
But you know what?
Even if you did know, maybe you still wouldn't have gone.
That's possible. But going back to what I said before, whereas when I was in my 20s and I was afraid to go back and I knew that I needed to do it and I went anyways.
Yeah.
I realized in this scenario I didn't want to go back because I was afraid, and I missed an opportunity to say goodbye. So that's it weighs on you, because you're like, fuck, I fucked up. No,
I don't think.
but you know what I mean, right?
Of course.
It's like you.
That's hard. Because if it's not your dad,
Yeah.
if it's anybody else, it's no big deal.
Sure.
But because it's your dad,
Yeah.
it's different.
But the weird thing about it is that when you live in a fictional world like we do in comics, and you write about these things, and to still fall in the same pit, of like, oh, these characters, how they resolve these things is by going towards the thing they fear most. That's how you overcome
Right.
that. And I made a mistake of not.
Yeah, but
Yeah, it's you know what I mean. It's still
superpowers.
no, of course not, and it's still tough,
Sure.
And so I feel extremely regretful that I didn't have the opportunity to have seen him before he passed.
Would it help to go back, go to his funeral? I don't know if go to his casket or I don't know what, but
Sure.
just kind of say, something to yourself, to him, a prayer or something that would help.
It might. I don't know. I've never lost a parent before.
Yeah.
It might. It might not. I don't know. Right. It's
We only have
That's-
one shot at this.
So there you go. That's life, right? You don't know. Maybe it will. Maybe it won't. So.
I say you go back and you tell everybody you're broke.
No.
Yeah.
Well, but that's the
Be
thing,
like,
right?
guys,
It's
I've had such bad money issues lately.
Well, you know what it is.
I've become a gambler
It's-
and I lost it all.
It's the equal parts of being like practical and emotional,
Yeah.
right? The practical thing to do would be to just take that whole lot and like, here you go. This is the most practical use of it. I could do both. Don't get me wrong, right?
Well, the practical stuff is to keep it.
But that too. I guess that's
more
also,
practical.
I never
Let them
thought of
raise
it that
their
way.
own money. Don't they
never
have
thought of it
jobs and
that way.
stuff? I mean,
I don't know. I don't know
Yeah.
I don't know their situation. I just know that, it's.
it's one thing
I don't
if
know.
your dad's sick and there's medical
Sure.
bills and he can't work. I get that.
Sure.
But if now he's passed on, I don't know. I don't
know, man. Like, it's the whole thing is strange. I never. This isn't normal. This
No.
isn't a thing that, hey, man, you know what I mean? Like, you remember that thing that you did? Okay, cool. It's like that.
Right.
What do you think? And it's So I don't know. I mean, I think there's a lot of reasons.
Yeah.
There's a lot of reasons to go back, and there's a lot of reasons not to go.
Yeah.
Right? Let's take money aside. Let's take all of that out of the way.
Okay.
And it's still, should I go or not go?
Yeah.
The same question still comes up.
Yeah.
Whether I should use this money on my flight or use the money to give to my stepsister for her school. It's.
Well, you said leave money out of it.
Yeah. Okay. You're right.
And you're like, hey, let's leave money.
Yeah,
out of
let's
it.
take
now
that
let's take
out
the
of
money
it.
and give it away. So you just said leave money out.
All right. So let's take that out of it.
Okay.
At the end of the day, it's still like.
Well, it's
Will I
away from your
get
family.
closure? Will I get closure if I go?
Yeah.
Or what exactly am I seeking to gain? And a part of me just wants to say goodbye. I want to be there, and a part of it is also now this is going back to the whole marriage thing now, where sometimes it feels like you're going through the ceremony of marriage so that other people know that you love each other, right?
Right.
And a part of me now feels like if I don't go back, a part of me thinks that my stepsister or my dad's current wife will think, oh, he doesn't care, so a part of me feels like I have to go back so that they know that I care, rather than I care from afar, and this is the right course of action would be this.
Francis,
it's of course.
This is so hard. And here's why this is killing me, because your dad never came to visit you, right? He never came to Canada, did he?
Well, that's what my mom said. Look, there's a lot.
He
of
never
reasons.
helped you financially when you guys moved.
No, never.
He let your mom struggle with 3 kids in a new country.
You're preaching what my mom has told me. It's
your mom's fucking right. I'm sorry to say it.
Sure.
She's a smart woman.
Sure.
She sounds like a smart woman.
Sure.
But I mean,
it's tough, man.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. This is getting to me. I'm sorry.
No,
but,
that's okay. That's
just
okay.
because I'm like, you don't really, these other people, but you don't really know them. You met them,
sure,
I guess, and technically you're blood related a little bit, to some of them. But I don't know. I just don't know how what they think is now or what they need is now your responsibility. You know what I'm saying?
No,
you've taken that as, and I get where you're coming from because I've done that in my own family where I've become the superhero of my family, or trying to. And it's too much. For me. I can see I've had to downgrade that quite a bit. And
I don't know. Maybe with us being such avid readers of comics since we were kids, maybe we have a hero complex that we don't know about.
Oh, 100%. I agree with that.
And it's look, anybody that reads comic books, they want to feel that way, and they want to feel.
Well, we're drawn to it.
Absolutely.
Right? We're probably, before we even read a comic, we're drawn.
Yeah. I'd like to think that everybody that reads these comics are good people because they want to have these feelings, unless they're there to read the villains. Those are the ones that those are the ones you have to be careful about. So
what does your wife, girlfriend think? Girlfriend think about all this? Does she have an opinion about it?
No, I mean she's super supportive. She also didn't grow up with her dad, so she knows exactly what I'm feeling, and she knows exactly what I'm going through, and she's supportive either way. You know what I mean?
I do get going there. And saying goodbye in person.
Sure.
And just being like, we had 9 years.
Yeah.
And that was about it. And just, take care.
But that's the weird thing, right? Is that you could simplify and say, 9 years, that's only a third of your life, But there's weight to the fact that he's my father.
Sure, of course.
Regardless of how much time we were physically around each other, to me that doesn't matter. He's my dad, and that alone is enough, and I think a lot of that is, I see a lot of my dad in my brother, I see a lot of my dad in myself.
Sure.
And to not have those feelings is to not love yourself, I guess. I don't know if that makes sense. But the weird thing is that so when I was working on Trinity 2, we'll go back to comics now.
Okay.
So when I was working, but also it's completely related. When I was working on Trinity 2, the reason why I think it's my favorite issue that I've written is that, in the issue, Superman, adult Superman, Clark Kent, father, son, he has...
Husband? Is he a husband?
Husband, yeah. Okay. He has an opportunity to to visit the past as an adult. That's
really interesting.
Absolutely. So in issue 2, Batman, Wonder Woman, and Superman, they go into the, I'm gonna do air
Barn.
quotes here,
Yeah.
go into the past,
Into the past.
and the three of them, they get to experience the relationship that Clark has with his father as a man and as a father, right?
That's
So,
interesting. Can I ask why is it
Yeah.
important for all three of them to go?
It's important for all three of them to go because at this point in juncture of the continuity of the DC universe, this particular Superman is a stranger to Batman and Wonder Woman.
Okay.
You know, so, New 52 Superman, he died. So, New 52 Batman and New 52 Wonder Woman, who are still around, and now that this pre-52 Superman has come out of the woodworks and said, hey, I'm back, they're like, who is this guy? We don't know him, right? So what I'm doing with Trinity is that's the story. The story is the three of them reconnecting with each other. And the bond that these characters have had through 75 years when New 52 happened, that was erased,
Right.
And then they started forming their own bond when the New 52 began a few years ago, and then when that Superman died, that bond was gone again. So some of my best friends, and I'm sure some of your best friends, you're friends with them because you knew them since you were a kid. You knew what they were like. You knew how they grew up. So the next 3 issues of Trinity is the three of them revisiting each other's childhood.
Oh, that's interesting.
So in a way, now here's the funny.
It's like Ghost of Christmas Past.
A little bit. Here's the thing about Trinity, right? So check this out. This was the challenge I had. Form a bond and friendship between the three of them, right? But in comics, and I'm sure you've read a lot about like storytelling and film and stuff like that, right? Which is that in order for these characters to grow together, I need to have them experience something that will fundamentally change who they are as characters, thus creating a bond between the three of them. But that's difficult to do when there's 3 other main books with these characters where they're having massive emotional journeys that they're going through in those books. So what I did was, instead of messing around with the present and accidentally going against the grain of what they're doing in the other book, I'm going to have the 3 of them experience each other's childhood, right? So when they come out of this story, it's as if they grew up together, even though in continuity they didn't. So they're going to have the same feelings and bond that they've had as if they grew up together, but they didn't.
How? You probably can't say. How are they able to do that?
I can't say that. I can't
It's
say
the
that.
doomsday trick.
I can't
It's a
say
doomsday
that.
trick.
Look, all you need to know is that at the moment they're in the past, and the 3 of them, they have the opportunity to reconnect with the people that have died, and not only reconnect with the people that have passed away, they have an opportunity to reconnect with themselves.
At any point, do their older selves tell the younger selves invest in Apple? Just
a good
so you
one.
know, just invest in Apple. That's all I'm gonna say.
They should. I mean, although Bruce's story is more about himself, and I don't think he needs any more money.
Yeah, he's
and,
all right.
Exactly, and Superman's
It'd be great if he became Bill Gates, though. It's some Elseworld thing.
His name is like a billionaire, and then there's like a 2 on the top, like billionaire square. He's just doubly billionaire-ish.
Yeah.
So issue 2 is about an adult Superman or an adult Clark Kent who is now a father, and he's still his father's son, and he has an opportunity to, for the first time, to talk to his dad as a father.
Wow.
That's a pretty big
Who
thing.
came up with that idea? Did you come up with it?
Well, I did.
You did.
I wrote.
Well, I don't know how much DC comes to you and says, we have an idea, just write about this or with that or whatever.
Well, the other idea they had was nothing like this idea.
Okay.
The last direction I got was, actually a previous guest of yours, Jeff Loeb. I love his work. They love his work, and they said, let's just do more of that. you know.
Thanks for checking out my podcast.
Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah, they were like, hey, listen, you know, that the Geoff stuff was very successful.
Sure.
So let's
Marvel and DC.
Absolutely, they're like, let's do this again. You know, so the initial thing they wanted me to do was to have I think the portrayal Trinity versus Avengers. I'm like, what? And they're like, well, we have these characters called the Retaliators, which is Grant Morrison's version in the DC universe of the Marvel characters. So they're like, let's just do a story around that. Yeah, there is, exactly. So I wrote an entire pitch around that, you know, and it was a fun story. It was a it was a fanboy story. You know, it was everything as a fan you wanted to do, you know, like Marvel characters. But you know what? Geoff had already done it. Yeah, and he did it really well. So we began to question, why are we doing this? You know, and it was, well, that's easy. It's going to sell a lot of books, and it's going to be a fun story. And when I started talking to my editors and Geoff as well, Geoff said, look, just tell a story about the characters. That was it. You know, that was as soon as, you know, Geoff said, just tell a story about the characters. Just ignore all this stuff. Ignore sales. Ignore, you know what I mean? Just tell a good story about the characters. And then that's when I threw everything out and just started over. You know, and I just said this story is about Diana, Bruce, and Clark. And that's the story. You know, there's no villain. There's no villain in the first issue. There's some semblance of a villain in the second issue. But the story isn't about the villains. It's about the three of them and their relationship. Yeah. You know, so
themselves.
And themselves, exactly. And the story is about them reconnecting. So,
what would you do if you could go back and see yourself as a kid?
Jeez.
You must have thought about it. If you're writing about
I did.
them.
Well, here's the thing, right? So in comics, it's wish fulfillment, right? And the reason why issue 2 is, in my opinion, it may not necessarily be the best thing I wrote, but it's my favorite thing that I've ever written, is because the story is about what I wish my relationship was like with my father. So when adult Clark Kent gets a chance to speak to his dad, and mind you, this is the past. Maybe it's an alternate universe. I don't know. I'm not going to say. I don't know.
Okay. Interesting.
He has a bonding experience with his dad, you know, and they're talking about being a father, you know, because at this point in time, in issue 2, the first time Jonathan Kent, Superman's father, sees him roll up with his costume, he's scared. He's scared because, first off, here's this guy with a costume, right, with a giant S on his chest, and the last time Jonathan Kent saw an S was on that ship that his adopted son, crashed in. So when he sees Superman, his first thoughts aren't like, oh, cool, he's like my son. His first thoughts are you here to take my son away? Right. So he's afraid. So when Jonathan Kent sees Superman for the first time, he is afraid of him, right? And young Clark Kent, he's afraid too. You know, this was the underlying tone in the first issue, where Clark is just like his father. He's afraid for his son and what the world might do to him if they knew he existed. And that didn't come from nowhere. That came from his dad, right? So issue 2...
Don't go out in the Philippines.
Exactly. So issue 2 is about Clark finding out where these ideologies came from and why it's a flawed ideology, you know. And even his father says so in the story, right? So there's this... the moment in the issue that made me cry was, you know, Bruce is kind of being a dick about it. He's like, listen, man, we might be fucking up the past. You need to shut the fuck up, Clark. Right. Say nothing, right? And here's Clark with his dad. And he's like, I want to say everything,
Yeah.
but Bruce says I can't say nothing, and he's like, I want to tell him about my son. I want to tell him that,
To me.
what it means to me.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing was, I realized I had this moment where the words that I wrote suddenly had so much more weight and meaning. Was Clark was talking about his son and how when he looks at his face, he's reminded of everybody that he loves. He's reminded, you look at your son, and you're like, oh, I love my son, but he's like, but also in him I see everybody. I see my family. I see my dad. I see all these people. And when I found out that my dad died, I was shocked, but I wasn't like super emotional. Yeah, I was processing the information. And it wasn't until I was laying down and I was looking at my daughter's face. I was smiling, and she was smiling. And only then did I break down, because I realized when I was looking at her face, I saw everybody that I loved. So the words have meaning,
Yeah.
and I was starting to understand why honesty in writing was or is much more valuable than anything I had done.
Even in comics,
Yeah.
Even in comics.
Sure. And then, but the funny thing was that Clark doesn't say that to his dad. He doesn't say that. He keeps it in. So, but when he finally does get to speak to his dad, he's, his father says to Clark, listen, I understand, I was scared. I thought you were here to take my son away. And, my life is about protecting him, and he says to Clark, listen, you're a father as well. And he says, in a way, I envy you. And Clark's like, what do you mean? He says, Clark says, I'm trying to raise my son in a similar fashion. He's like me, he has powers, and I'm afraid of what the world would think. And Clark's own father says to him, listen, I envy you because you know exactly how he feels.
Yeah.
I'm just here protecting his safety, but I don't know if I'm helping him out emotionally. You know exactly what it's like to have these powers. You know exactly what it's like to have these same fears.
Yeah.
And he goes, and also the big difference is that, I had, Jonathan can say, I have Martha. We share these secrets together, right? And he says, you have your wife and you have your friends. You have Wonder Woman, you have Batman. He says, I don't have that. You have these people that you can share the secret with.
Yeah.
That I wish that I did. So he says, his father says, it's these walls that I built. You don't need those walls. So it's a big moment for Clark. And and then that's when John says, okay, now tell me who you are. I need to know if you're from the future or if you're his father, because God damn it, you look a lot like him.
Yeah.
John's like, you look a lot like him. Are you sure you're not his dad? He's like, no. Or you're like his uncle? Something like that. And John is trying to get advice from Clark Kent how to raise himself.
Yeah. Wow.
Right? And he's like, listen, I can't tell you anything. I can't. And Jonathan's like, whatever, what an asshole, right? And then through a series of events, Jonathan Kent ends up having to save Clark.
Oh, wow.
And that's when Clark finally breaks down. He says, listen, I can't tell you anything. I can't tell you anything that you don't already know. He says something to the effect of, you're a good dad, and there's nothing I can tell you that will make you a better father. All your son needs, your son doesn't need a superhero father, all your son needs is you. You just need you to be you. And in a way, that was Clark talking to himself, like him realizing this thing, right? So each issue of Trinity will tackle this kind of scenario between each of the characters. It's finding themselves, whether it's finding themselves through a past version of themselves or through the people that they've lost in the past, right? So that's the story. The story is their relationship, how they become friends, and by the end of the first arc, like how they become a family. The Trinity family.
Wow.
Right.
It's very deep.
It is for me. I mean, I hope that
in general. I mean,
that
I think a lot of people will be able to relate to that.
I hope so.
Everybody's lost somebody that means something to them.
Sure. Well, I think I'd like to think I'm learning. Because when I wrote The Flash, I was very when I do the visual storytelling, I'm very much about rhythm, right? So the way my panelings are, I do this weird thing when I'm looking at a page. I go bap 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 bap, and if it didn't follow a rhythm like that, it was a boring story, right? So I tried to write dialogue that way in The Flash, and if it didn't fit in that rhythm, I would easily sacrifice content in order to make it fit that rhythm, and I realized how big of a mistake that was, because in Trinity, the rhythm is still in the visual storytelling, but I don't have the skill set or ability to follow that rhythm, but with the same content that I can do, or with the same content that I can tell if I don't adhere myself to that rhythm, if that makes any sense at all.
Sure.
So now the dialogue it's honest. The characters are saying how they feel. The characters are saying how I feel. And it may not be as rhythmic as The Flash was, but it's more, it's just more honest, and I think it transformed the story in directions that I never knew I was going in, like I knew where the big story was, but now for the first time, I feel like I'm finally coming close to executing what my intention was, because that's how storytelling is. You have your intention, and you have your execution, right? And most of the time, you'll be happy with like, all right, I accomplished 60% of my intention, right? And I felt like on The Flash, once I was done, I know people reacted to it very positively, and I loved it too. This was my favorite character. I felt like it only scratched the surface of my intent. So one day I'm going to come back to that character.
That's good.
But
who put you on Trinity? Did you volunteer, or did they put you on it?
No, I didn't. I was getting ready to work on Aquaman Earth 1, and I had this Superman story that I wanted to do, and I sent it to the editor, and I said, "Listen,
is it like the one that you're doing?
Not even remotely close.
Okay.
Not even remotely close." So I had this idea, and it was a plot heavy idea, right? And I was just trying to write a classic Superman adventure story, and I sent it to the Superman editor, and I said, "Listen, I'm not trying to get the Superman book now," and I said, "but this is a story I want to tell in the next few years," right? And he loved it because it was big, it was epic, and the big problem with it was it couldn't work within continuity. It would have had to have been like a limited series, like New Frontier or something like that, because it did use the other characters.
Right.
And but I said, listen, I don't intend to do this now. Maybe I'll do the story in a few years. But I guess being a Superman editor, that was one of the things that he was looking for, is somebody to write big epic stories, and that was when he approached me about working on Trinity, and
Get the 3. That's pretty epic.
And that was pretty epic. And the irony of it is that the story we ended up using is nothing, not even remotely close at all to that story, but it's a better story.
Yeah.
It's an emotional story. So we found...
To me, it feels like an important story to tell now because
Sure.
of all the stuff you've been going through.
Sure.
and like you couldn't tell the same story.
No, I couldn't tell
in
that
5
other
years,
story now.
or 5 years
Yeah,
ago.
I couldn't tell that other story now because it seems empty, you know. So it's interesting to have gotten hired to do a book because they like the scale of the action in the other one, and the stakes. The stakes were very high, and then we end up coming up with a story that is so small. But the thing is that it's not small because there's nothing more epic and there's nothing more high stakes than family and the emotions that they have and friendship, you know. So when you look at it that way, this isn't a small story; it's a big story, you know.
It's more relatable.
Yeah, I hope so. I hope so. You know, I mean, when you're working on Trinity, and you have a book like Justice League of America, where do you find your place, right? And it just so happened to work perfectly that, you know, our place is writing stories about how these characters feel and their relation to each other as people, not as superheroes, the relationship to each other as people, right? Because ultimately that will obviously affect how they are as superheroes, you know. And, you know, the way I like to describe it is that the book, it's not about superheroes and villains. This book is about people, right? And it just so happens to include the 3 greatest superheroes around, you know, and their families.
Are you all digital now? Are you one of those guys that's all digital?
No, it's kind of like a sandwich. So my layouts and pencils are digital. It's just easier to manipulate and change it, so that way when I need to change the story or adjust, I then print that out like 10% opacity. Like we're talking, you almost can't see it, right? And then I ink it in watercolor traditionally because I do like that feel. You know, that's hard to get digitally. And then I go back to digital once I scan the inks in watercolor, and I color it digitally. You know, so it's a
Don't you miss?
it's a mix
because
of
like
things, yeah.
Doesn't that hurt? Does that for artists? They could draw a whole panel, a whole page,
Sure.
and then take it to a con and sell it for a couple $100.
Sure.
You don't have that now, right? You have to do that
I do.
now.
Well,
Oh, you
because
do?
I all my
Does that-
stuff is still traditional.
Oh, it is?
The only
I think you said it was.
okay. So this is where the process changed. So back in the days, and a lot of people still do this. When you look at a big page, 11 by 17, it's large. It's scary, right?
Yeah.
It's a blank canvas. You don't know what to do with it.
Yeah.
So most artists, we're not confident people. So I used to draw a thumbnail. They're called a thumbnail because they're small.
Right.
So
Most people, I think, start that way.
Yeah, so you would draw the page on a piece of paper like that. It was
Right.
maybe, I don't know, 2 inches, 3 inches tall, something like that. Not very large.
Yeah.
Because you're able to keep the proportions there, and
And you can do
you
as
can
many
fill
as
it
you
up.
want.
Exactly.
If it doesn't work, you do another one.
Exactly. And when you found something that you liked, what you would do is I used to go to Kinko's and enlarge that,
Oh, really? You
Right.
go enlarge the thumbnail.
enlarge the thumbnail,
Oh, okay.
and then I would tape it behind an artboard, then I would lead box it.
Oh, no shit. Okay.
Right. So that's how it was back then. Now, there's still original art on that board, but the conception of the idea was on that little piece of loose paper.
Right.
Right. Now, the main difference is that loose paper is now on the computer. Right.
Yeah.
So all those thumbnails are on that little thing. Right. And before, I used to print that out, you know, enlarge it, put a board on top, and lightbox it, right? And as I got more proficient with penciling digitally, I realized, oh wow, this is really clean. It's good to go. I don't need any more fleshing out. So I started printing it right on the artboard at about 10% opacity, and then just inking and watercoloring over it, right? So I still have original art.
How long does it take you to do a page? Drawing, inking, color, the whole deal. Can you do it in a
I
day?
did. Oh yeah, easily.
Oh, look at you.
I
at
did.
you. That's really
Dude,
impressive.
if it's one thing I'm confident about, it's my speed.
No shit.
Yeah.
You're like the Flash. You're drawing.
Yeah. And so But the thing is, it's hard for me. I've never sat down beginning to end and finished a page because I would do it in chunks.
Right.
So I would do all my layouts and pencils like in like 2-3 days, and then from there
it's more time.
Exactly. Because then you develop that rhythm, right?
Yeah.
And
I get that.
then I'll spend like 2 weeks just inking. Then I'll spend a week just coloring, right? So right now I'm just writing. I'm just doing writing and then layouts, right? And then the next stage from here is just inking, right? So issue 2, all in all, I believe it took me about 5.5 weeks to write, pencil, ink, and color the book.
The first one.
The issue 2.
Issue 2.
Issue 1.
5 weeks.
5
That's
weeks.
actually a little slow. No, that's 35 days.
Because the keep in mind,
pages,
I'm
right?
doing 3 jobs.
Yeah, that's true.
Typically a penciler, not a penciler inker, a penciler will get 5 weeks to pencil a book.
Oh, really? Okay.
4 weeks they would like groan about it.
Right.
That's a page a day. That's easy.
Right.
You know. So the typical schedule for a penciler, not a penciler inker, not a penciler inker colorist, not a writer penciler inker colorist, just a penciler, is typically 4 to 5 weeks.
Okay.
That is very normal, but some people get 6 weeks, 7 weeks. I know some people to have gotten 2 months to pencil a book.
Wow.
Right? I wrote a book.
Yeah.
I penciled a book. I inked a book. And
Do you
I
get
colored a book?
Do you get
5
multiple paychecks because
Of course. They're separate jobs. There's
Now
no
we're talking.
This isn't a McDonald's combo and you get a discount. Those are separate jobs, you
Good.
know, and
I'm glad to hear that.
we could get a collaborator to do those things, but part of the reason comics is infectious, you know. I just wanted to pencil. That's all I want. I just wanted to be a penciler. That was all I wanted to do. And then once I started inking, it changed the way I drew. It changed the way I drew because I wasn't a good inker. So I was forced to draw in a way that the brushes and the ink would allow me to draw. So that's how my quote-unquote style came about. It came from my lack of proficiency with inking, right? But I found it so much more rewarding because with pencil, I had so much control that inevitably my pencils, you could see all of my influences in my pencils, right? But with inking, because I didn't have as much control, I was forced to work with the tool. And in a way, it was liberating, you know, but also restricting at the same time, right?
Who were your influences?
As a penciler, I grew up in the 90s, so, you know, Jim Lee, Mark Silvestri. I really liked
Todd McFarlane,
Rob Liefeld, and then eventually Joe Madeira, Humberto Ramos, Mike Waringo, you know. So when I was just penciling, you could see those influences, and now you can only see a glimpse of them, you know, maybe in the shots that I decide to do because they're more, you know, dynamic, which is, you know, a very 90s thing, you know. So it came from that, you know. I wanted to ink myself, and I found that I discovered myself artistically once I started inking myself. And then, you know, going back to my dad, like, so my mom is an artist, and that's what I wanted to do. You know, I had no interest in writing, but, you know, except, you know, you don't want to be like your dad, right? But I just felt compelled. You know, it wasn't that, oh, here's an artist wanting to write. I needed to write.
Yeah.
You know, it was something that I needed to do.
How hard was it to break that barrier? What was it to get into writing?
Well, I mean, it is and it isn't.
Have you written before?
I did, yeah. Before I started writing The Flash, I had written a couple things back in the days.
For comics?
For comics, but I couldn't get credited because if I did, they would have had to pay me. And they didn't want to pay me.
Gotcha.
So
For Top Cow?
I'm not going to say what those books were, but I wrote a couple issues.
Okay, gotcha.
And, you know, that was the only way they would let me write.
Gotcha.
Was if I...
Okay, so you had proof that you wrote stuff, and that's how they were like, oh, okay, you can write.
I think my editors believed in me enough in my storytelling capabilities as an artist, right? So they felt confident. I wouldn't say 100% confident. I don't think they expected The Flash to be as well received as it was, written by a quote-unquote novice writer,
Right.
you know. And, you know, it has many faults, and I think the thing is with DC is that I've always gotten support from them, and I think that the difficult people to get support from were actually the fans initially, because you're an artist. To them, that's what you are.
Well, and they're also dishing out the money for the book.
Sure,
it's
exactly.
Also beloved characters.
Absolutely,
and all that stuff.
absolutely. Whereas where I was going with my career was that I love comics, and to me, I couldn't just do the one thing. I wanted to tell stories. That's part of being a comic artist. You know, a comic artist isn't just drawing. You know, I wanted to be a comic book creator. I wanted to be, because now when I think comic book artist, I don't think, you know, just penciling. I think of the whole thing. I wanted to be a cartoonist. You know, I wanted to do what you know, the writers and artists that have done like comic strips for newspapers. They're one guy.
Yeah, right.
You know, and I wanted to do that in comics, and I'm not the first one to think and feel this way.
Yeah.
You know,
Frank Miller.
and sure, so that's what I wanted to do, and I was, look, I know that my art is the pretty girl in the comic book, and the story is hopefully the personality that will get them to stay, right?
That's a funny analogy.
And you know, I'm hoping that with Trinity, and the reaction to the first issue so far has been surprising. You know, a lot of them, their response is, "Oh, I'm surprised. This is actually written pretty well." I'm like, "Oh, well, thanks." You know,
We expected so much less.
Yeah, exactly. So, you know, so I felt pretty good about that. So that, you know, the fans were a little bit harder to
Sure.
to win over, but the company, DC, has been extremely supportive of what I wanted to do creatively. And here's the thing, if I wanted to drop the writing altogether, let's say tomorrow I said, look, I don't want to write anymore, I could get bigger gigs as an artist, but I would rather take the lesser gig that I get control over, and the vision of the book falls and succeeds completely on my account, you know.
Yeah. Do you
And-
think you'll ever in the future draw Spider-Man?
I don't know. I mean, look,
Never know.
You hang around long enough in the industry, you'll get to draw everybody. You know, I'm. When I was younger, you know, I was like, oh man, okay, now I need to draw this guy, now I need to draw that guy. You know, I tried to get on The Flash years ago, years before I had even began writing it, and I was so glad that I didn't get it back then, because I wouldn't have had the opportunity to write it.
Right.
You know, and write it and draw it. So to me, it felt like getting the 3-point shot at the buzzer to get yourself to the finals. You know, I was like, oh, this is so good. I'm so glad it didn't happen like my first year, you know, where I would have been in the bench, but we're in the playoffs. You know what I mean? I don't know if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I get
but,
you.
know, I wasn't ready at the time when I wanted the book, you know, and I think back then I wanted projects based on me wanting to draw these things. And that the thing that changed everything was my when I started working on adventure comics with Geoff Johns. I realized that you can find joy in whatever it is that you're working on, as long as you write stories that emotionally connect to you, right? So when I worked with Geoff for the first time on Adventure Comics, he didn't know me, and I didn't know him very well, and I didn't know what his intent was for the book. The other Superboy books that I've seen are, you know, Leather Jacket, very action oriented. He's fighting like King Shark, you know, so it's fun and very superheroic, and you know, and now mind you, I already got the job at this point, right? But this was like more. I think it was more the contract at play that got me the job, less so Geoff saying like, I really want to get that guy, right? I think they were like, yeah, you know, this guy's coming up, he'll be good for this book, and I think Geoff's like, that's cool, you know. And so mind you, when I talked to Geoff and I said, listen, I don't know what this book is going to be about or what the story is going to be about, but, and I said, I don't know where your mind is, but I want to do something different with my art. And at this point, when they hired me on the book, I had just finished The Legion, and I said, I want to ink myself, and I want to use watercolors. And they were like, well, could you, well, what does that look like? Could you just draw like a pinup or something like that? Yeah. And at the time, I drew, I guess, a pinup. It ended up being the double-page spread in the first issue, where Connor is standing with Martha, Kent, and Crypto, and they're looking out in the cornfield and the sun is setting. So I drew that page, and I said, listen, I can't draw a pinup of him just flying. I said, this is the pinup that I drew, because this is what I think Geoff is going to write. I don't know. And I said, I don't know if this is what he's going to write. I said, but this is how I'm hoping the book will feel, like very much like a Richard Donner kind of Superman.
Yeah.
And at the time, I didn't know that Geoff had worked with Richard Donner.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So I showed him this thing, and I said, look, my vision for this book is like a Norman Rockwell kind of thing, you know? And I didn't...
Mine.
Yeah, and yeah, he's great. And I didn't just draw that pinup because I had a story in mind. So on Monday, when they were just expecting a pinup of what my inking and watercolors look like, they ended up getting 5 pages because I drew that double page spread, and then I drew a page 1 and 2, 3, and I drew a 4 and 5. So I gave him like a 5-page sample over a weekend of pencils and inks.
Oh my God!
And it was for a job I already got. And
they must have loved that because they're like, shit, this guy's fast.
Yeah, so I was like, hey,
he's good and fast. Hired.
Yeah, so I'm like, hey Geoff, I don't know what your vision for the book is, but I think based on our conversation, it's gonna look something like this, right? And he's like, yes. And then when I got the script to the first issue, I realized I was a week ahead of schedule because the first 5 pages that I drew as a sample was the first 5 pages of Adventure Comics #1.
That's crazy.
You know, and I wouldn't be surprised if that was the first time. They're like, hey, you know, maybe he can write, you know, if we give him enough leeway, you know. So I'd like to think that doing those samples for a job that I already got was a career changer, you know, because, you know, I could have been just happy. I don't need to do samples. I already got this job. What do I need to do samples for?
Yeah.
But I wanted to have a different voice in my art. You know, at that time when I was working on The Legion, I felt pretty burnt, you know. I was just drawing in a way that I felt, how could I succeed in this company? I think if I drew like this, I think I would succeed, you know. And then I realized this isn't me anymore. This is what I want to do. So I decided I don't want to do that. So then that's when I started inking my own work, and I felt like that was a real turning point, you know, because I threw away my desire to work on the Flash. I threw away my desire to work on Batman or Superman, and I said, and mind you, at the time I wasn't enough of a name to get those books, right? But I could get Superboy. And at that point in time, I'm like, you know what? If I can't get those books, I'm going to draw however the hell I want, right? And go figure, once I did that, my project immediately after that was The Flash with Geoff Johns, which led to me writing and drawing The Flash. Mm-hmm. So this thing that I said, I'm just going to do it this way because it's the way I want to do it, I never expected it to be the thing that got me these characters, you know. When I was early on, when I was trying to play the game and be the kind of artist that I felt that they wanted and needed and was marketing, it just wasn't working, you know.
Well, it's super impressive.
Thanks.
I love your work.
Thank you.
And I was very excited. Yeah. I randomly clicked on your name the other day before I came to Toronto. Mm-hmm. And I was like, oh, because I didn't see you at NYCC.
I was there very, very briefly.
Very brief, so I missed you. So I was like, oh, I wonder why he wasn't there. And I clicked on it. I was like, oh, he's in Ontario. He's in Toronto, and I'm going there like, tomorrow or next day. And I'm shot in the dark. Can you talk to me? And I'm so glad that you were able to come here, and I'm really grateful. Yeah, for sure. For your time, and especially now with all the stuff you're going through.
It's my pleasure, man. Like, look, believe me. Did I feel a little bit weird coming to a strange man's hotel room? a little bit.
And I was naked when I answered the door, which is strange.
Well, that was the thing. I was like, am I the pretty woman in this situation? But look, we've been Facebook friends for a long time.
Hopefully I was like, I hope if anybody investigates me a little bit, they'll see I'm on the up and up.
Yeah. Well, that was the funny thing, is that I think anybody that, for the most part, you know the people that you know, and at this point, Facebook, like, you don't know 90% of the people there, right? But when you first, when I first got on there, I think that was when we were all first just getting on there.
Probably.
That first 10%, and that first 10%, you kind of remember them.
Right?
Because it's like, I don't know them, but I'm gonna get to know them through Facebook, right? And I think that first 10%, you're like, I've met a lot of those first 10% at conventions and stuff like that, and you feel a little bit at ease, but then the other 90%, God, who are they? That's scary.
Yeah, those are the freaks.
Those are the freaks. I'm just kidding. Please buy our books.
Well, hey man, I could ask you questions all day. I got a million more, so we'll save it for another time.
Yeah, and good luck on your marathon.
Oh, appreciate it. It's gonna be rainy, I think.
I look cool. Shit, it's cold. It's Canada. Wear a sweater.
Well, thanks a lot, Francis. Appreciate it.
No, thank you. This was cathartic.
I'm glad.
Yeah.
I'm glad.
So there you go, folks. That was my talk with Francis Manapul. Again, thank you so much, Francis, for talking with me. It's really great to meet you and get to spend that time with you. I'm a great admirer of your work, and I think everybody should go and get Trinity. It's up to issue 3 now. It's a great story, and if you have time, go check out Francis's other work in Flash and Detective Comics and stuff. So there you go. So once again, follow me on Twitter at EJ Scott and the podcast at EJ Podcast. My website is ejscott.com. Go to crowdrise.com/7on7 to donate to to my charities. I also I ran marathons back in 2012, and a documentary called Running Blind was made about it. And you can find that on iTunes for just a couple bucks. You can rent it or buy it. It's on Amazon Play and Google Play. Not Amazon Prime, but like you could buy a digital copy on Amazon. So there you go. So go check that out. You won't be sorry you check that out. It's only 30 minutes long, but it's a really well done documentary. And there you have it. So that's it. So go subscribe to my podcast. Check out my other episodes. Leave some nice comments out there in the world. And we'll see you next time. Thanks.